Okay, so this is the shoulder girdle. We're going to start with the most superficial, which is the deltoid. It originates on the acromion process, and it inserts on the deltoid tubercle of the humerus. It is responsible for abduction of the arm and medial rotation. You can't see very well on Arnold because he's very muscular. Underneath that, we have the infraspinatus. It originates on the medial border of the scapula once I pull the trapezius out, and it inserts on the greater tubercle of the humerus. The infraspinatus is responsible for also medial rotation of the arm and abduction. Then we have our teres minor, which the insertion point is way deep to this, and it's on the lateral border of the scapula, and then it also inserts on the greater tubercle of the humerus. It is responsible for lateral rotation and adduction of the arm. Beneath that, we have our teres minor, major. Major. It originates on the inferior angle of the lateral border of the scapula right down here, and it inserts on the greater tubercle coming underneath the armpit area. And then moving on, and the teres major is responsible for medial rotation and also abduction, so adding together. Moving on to our pectoral muscles. So the largest one is our pectoralis major. It originates on the sternum right here and also originates partially on the clavicle. It inserts on the greater tubercle of the humerus, and it is responsible for medial rotation of the arm and also adduction. Beneath that, we have our pectoralis minor. It originates on ribs 3, 4, 5, and it inserts on the coracoid process of the clavicle, and it is also responsible for adduction and medial rotation of the arm.
Now moving on to the anterior forearms, or these are the flexors of the wrist and forearm. Start with pronator teres. Pronator teres is a pronator of the forearm. Has two heads. One is on the medial epicondyle of the humerus, the other is on the coracoid process of the ulna, and then it attaches on the lateral proximal portion of the radius. Again, this is a pronator teres. Then we have flexor digitorum superficialis, which, just imagine these heads flopped, flip-flopped. So we have the long head attached to the medial epicondyle of the humerus, and the short head is in the medial portion of the proximal radius for the origins. And the insertions come all the way down to the distal phalanges of metacarpals 2 through 5. Again, this is a flexor, and so because Arnold is rigid, I'll show you on my hand, flexing of the digits. Then,
and it also flexes the wrist.
And yes, flexor of the wrist. More anterior forearm muscles. We have brachioradialis, which attaches on the lateral epicondyle of the humerus and inserts on the styloid process of the radius. Brachioradialis is a flexor of the forearm. And we have flexor pollicis longus, which originates in the interosseous membrane between the radius and the ulna, and then inserts on the distal phalange of the thumb. Flexor pollicis just flexes the thumb, so can't do it on Arnold. Now we have a bunch of muscles that all originate on the lateral condyle of the humerus, epicondyle of the humerus, starting with medial condyle of the humerus. So then we have flexor carpi radialis, which again originates on the medial condyle of the humerus and then attaches at the base of metacarpals 1 and 2. This is a flexor of the wrist and an adductor of the hand. We have palmaris longus, again originating on the medial epicondyle of the humerus and then inserting into this really nice palmar aponeurosis here, so that's a flat sheath of tendon. And this is a weak wrist flexor. Finally, we have flexor carpi ulnaris, again originating on the medial epicondyle of the humerus and then attaching in the pisiform hamate bones of the wrist here. You can't really see because he's underneath the aponeurosis of palmaris longus. And this is a wrist flexor and a hand adductor as well. So now we'll move on to the superficial muscles of the posterior forearm, starting with extensor carpi radialis. Extensor carpi radialis is a extension of the wrist and an abduction of the hand, which you can't really see too well because he's rigid, but abduction of the hand. Extensor carpi radialis has a longus and a brevis portion, but both attach at the lateral epicondyle of the humerus and then attach at the second and third metacarpal. The longest attaches to the second, brevis attaches to the third. Moving on, we have extensor carpi ulnaris, also attaching at the originating at the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, and then inserting at the base of the fifth metacarpal. This again is responsible for extension of the wrist and adduction of the hand. Then we have extensor digiti minimi, also attaching at the lateral condyle of the humerus, and then comes down and inserts on the proximal phalange of the pinky finger. This is responsible for extension of the little finger, and it is a really weak wrist extensor as well. This doesn't move too well, but that's okay. Now we'll move a little deeper to the deep muscles of the forearm, starting with the supinator. Supinator originates on the lateral epicondyle of the humerus and then attaches on the radial, on the radius, distal radial tuberosity. Supinator, as it sounds, supinates, so again we can't really show it too well, so supination of the arm here. Moving down, we have the abductor pollicis. This originates in the interosseous membrane between the ulna and the radius, and then attaches at the just at the lateral edge of the first metacarpal. Abductor pollicis abducts the thumb. Again, we can't show it on Arnold because he is rigid. We have a few more muscles that deal with our very exciting opposable thumb. That comes to extensor pollicis. So we have a longus and a brevis portion. Brevis attaches on the originates on the radius and attaches at the distal phalange of the thumb. Remember, thumb has distal and proximal, and that's all. Proximal. And then longus originates on the ulna and attaches at the distal. So extensor pollicis extends the thumb and is a weak extender of the wrist as well. Then we have extensor indicis, which also originates on the ulna and then comes all the way down to insert on the distal phalange of the first finger, and is responsible for extension of the first finger, and has a weak extension property to it as well for the wrist. On to the brachium, the upper arm of Arnold. So we'll start with biceps brachii. Biceps brachii has two heads, a long and a short head. Long head attaches to the coracoid process of the scapula. Short head is on the supraglenoid tubercle of the scapula, then fuses into the main body of the muscle, and then attaches on the radius. It's this proximal radial tuberosity. There's an aponeurosis here, which is what this little second piece is. On the back, posterior, we have triceps brachii. Oh, sorry, and biceps brachii is a flexor of the arm. On the back, and also a supinator.
Good job.
Yeah, but triceps brachii, we have three heads. We have a long head, a medial head, also called a short head, and the lateral head, also called the lateral head, which then fuses into the body and attaches at the olecranon. So the different places, we have the long head, which attaches on the supraglenoid process of the scapula. We have the lateral head, which attaches on the more proximal portion of the humeral shaft, and the medial head, the short head, which attaches on a slightly more distal portion of the humeral shaft. Triceps brachii is responsible for extension of the arm. Moving on to some slightly smaller but equally important muscles of the brachium. We have coracobrachialis, which attaches, can't truly see, but on the coracoid process of the scapula, and attaches on the medial portion of the more proximal humeral shaft. Coracobrachialis is responsible for adduction of the arm, as well as flexion of the arm. Put your pectoris major back or not. And then we move down to brachialis. This is a important flexor of the arm. Brachialis attaches on the distal lateral shaft of the humerus, spans the elbow joint, and then attaches on the ulna. Brachialis again, important for flexion.